Welcome to the Dr. Chris Radio Horror Show. If you're not able to catch the broadcast of the MP3 of this interview, hopefully you're checking this out in the video format on the Dr. Chris Radio Horror YouTube channel. Tonight on the show with us, we have Sascha Graham, a expert in the field of tarot card reading, which I am not an expert of, but I do have covered some aspects of that on my podcast with actress Mel Heflin called Supernatural Creatures and Lore, where we talk about the monsters, mythology, ghosts, and goblins that Sam and Dean Winchester on the TV series Supernatural have fought, and what the real-world history is based on what the writers wrote on the show. Sasha was recently cast in a movie, and I recognized her from the photograph posted on Facebook and said, "Oh, I've seen some of this woman's movies in the 90s. She was a scream queen of some kind." I was like, that's cool. So I reached out to her, looked at her website, and now she's on the show with us. Thank you for coming on the show with us, Sasha.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
So your career started in like the 90s, and a lot of like kind of direct-to-video low-budget horror movies like Addicted to Murder, Polymorph, Bloodletting, Guilty Pleasures, Addicted to Murder, Tainted Blood, things like that.
Yeah.
What made you want to become a kind of an independent scream queen for a while?
So I moved to New York City when I was 18, like straight out of high school to become an actor.
Whoa!
'Cause,
That's a horror story.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Back in the day, you'd move to, you'd show up in Times Square with $5 and a dream in your pocket.
Oh my God. So yes, tell us about that story.
Yeah, so I moved to the city and I started auditioning. I was like getting like backstage where you would like audition, and I was doing a bunch of plays and independent films, but then I got cast in Kevin Lindenmuth's Addicted to Murder, which was part of the underground shot on video, but straight to video scene that was happening at this weird time
Mhm.
where all these low budget straight to video movies were getting into Blockbuster because it was like the golden age of Blockbuster. So my low budget indie flicks were showing up on the shelves right next to big budget movies. So
Like
like
Species or Independence Day, which is around what would have come out around that time.
yeah.
Gargoyle Girls, the story of two 12th century female gargoyles released in the 20th century. Alien Agenda, things like that. These all definitely look like the direct-to-video, flair market. They all have a kind of this kind of like sexy horror vibe based on a lot of the artwork to the covers.
Yeah.
Was that something that you were like, well, it's paying the bills and I feel safe, I'll do it kind of feel? Because I know that sometimes a lot of these films, like if you remember, what's the company that puts out the Puppet Master films?
Trauma?
No, different, more money than Trauma.
Oh, okay.
uh, Charles, not Charles Dance, that's the actor from Game of Thrones. What's Full Moon Studios?
Oh, okay. All
Full Moon
right.
Studios. They put out like again, like the Puppet Master movies or Doctor Mordred or things like that. You know what I mean? They were kind of low budget, more budget than Trauma. Still had the mix of like horror and sex and things like that.
Right, right. Well, so I was very unique in that, well, first of all, let me say that the minute I started auditioning for stuff, like I would just get cast in horror things left and right. Like my first big like stage job was a live vampire weekly show called La Commedia del Sangue. And we would play venues
Wow.
all around the city from S&M clubs to cabaret clubs. And then we
Woo!
were doing like vampire auctions. And I had been obsessed with Interview with a Vampire when it was like what, 2 or 3 years before I had read it. So I was like, yes, I love these strong, like supernatural creatures. And so when I fell into all of the horror movies, luckily for me, I was always playing a supernatural creature. So I was either a vampire, a werewolf, a mafia hit chick. But I was like never a final girl, even if my character died. And I was never sexually put in anything like that I would find inappropriate. Like I was never like I often like people will be like, you're the one scream queen who never like took her top off or whatever. Yeah, and it just wound up that I got to play all these super fun roles. And like as an actor, like to play like a strong supernatural creature is so much fun rather than like the girlfriend role or like, yeah. So it was just awesome. It was just fun.
When the contracts come in for some of these movies, was there like something in the contract saying we want you to go topless in the scene? Do you want you we want you to do this pretend sex scene, even though there's nothing ever going to be filmed? It's going to be all shadows and lighting and stuff like that.
No,
No,
never.
okay.
They knew. I think they knew. I think they knew intrinsically that that was not what I was interested in doing, and therefore I was asked to appear in a couple magazines. Oh, there was a Sexy Skin vampire magazine that I appeared in, but I wouldn't. I just there was just a regular
A
photo.
sexy skin vampire magazine sounds awesome, but could also be problematic depending on what it is. There was a guy named Father Sebastian. I don't know if you know anything about the vampire community. The
Yes.
vampire community, let's just use that in quotations, named Father Sebastian. He tried to resurrect an old vampire magazine he had years ago and only lasted, unfortunately, for like 9 issues, and he canceled it. I was like, what happened to your magazine? He's like, dude, the print industry is dead. We just had diminishing returns. You know, it's like if we had somebody fantastic for an interview or a hot model on the cover, it would sell. Otherwise, the magazines would just be in the toilet. And I was just like, that sucks. Because I kept like offering him to be like, hey, let me be your correspondent here in Massachusetts. You know who I know. I want to go to the Edward Gorey house. We'll do like a whole article on their exhibit about Edward Gorey's. Because Edward Gorey, if you don't know who that is, was the BBC mystery artist at the beginning of their TV show. But he was also the stage designer for Dracula in the 70s. The one that Franklin Jella would play before he would play Dracula in the movie. Raul Juliá would play. Terrence Stamp would play. You know, all these like actors before they became, you know, who Raul Juliá, Terrence Stamp, and Franklin Jella would become through the 80s and 90s. They would play Dracula on stage.
I love Edward Gorey's stuff. I think he's amazing. I'm actually working on a vampire project right now, not a movie, a tarot deck. But yeah, no, I'm super familiar with that, and actually with Father Sebastian.
I have 2 tarot decks to my name, even though I'm not a tarot deck reader, nor do I have belief. I have skepticism as well. I'm not a big follower of, even though I do a show called Supernatural Creatures and Lore, that's just to be like, this is fun to talk about. Where does a little chupacabra come from? Where does the white woman come from on the side of the road? You know, because Sam and Dean fought that creature. So we're going to talk about where the genesis of it is. You know what I mean? The last 2 episodes that we recorded are about fairies and dragons, which there's so much out there about those. So we really had to like condense it down to a half-hour episode. Be like, you want to know more about dragons? There's plenty of lore out there. But this is my biggest claim to fame as a vampire thing. This is Vlada, a Dracula tale. This is the gender swap this is the story of Dracula, but we gender swap the entire cast.
Nice.
So all of the characters are gender swapped, and we simplified the hell out of the book too, because that book is way too long. But we basically take the main story elements and we told a very trimmed down basic story. As one bad review said, I don't understand where it takes place and why he decided to trim the story down so much. There's so much more he could have put in. And I was just like, because I think the original story of Dracula is just filled with way too much like fluff that doesn't need to be in a modern day contemporary setting. You know, a book written 125 years ago does not work today in 2024 sometimes.
Is that a graphic novel or is that a straight?
It is a graphic novel.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah, so the artwork is by Ken Hunt, so there's pictures in there like that. It's on my Etsy and my Amazon.
Ooh.
That's Vlada's tassel. So, but how many times did you play a vampire? And talk about this play before we get to your tarot. The play you just mentioned. You said you were in a play in New York about. Name the play again.
It's called La Commedia del Sangue.
What does that say in English?
The comedy of blood, right? The comedy of blood. And that was put together by a journalist named Tony Sokol. And there's a Wikipedia page if you can find it. And Tony was a journalist who was obsessed with vampires. Again, this is like I want to say like 1990.
Okay.
So it was back in the days when
before your filmography started.
Yeah, before the filmography started. Yeah. So I'm sure that's probably why I got cast in Addicted to Murder. And like we were a vampire troupe who would just go around the city doing shows. It was so awesome. We were often told there might be real life people who lived as vampires in the audience, but back in the 90s, everything was a lot more mysterious, right? People would communicate through the Village Voice, not online. So we never knew like who was in the audience or what was going on. And it was so much crazy fun.
That sounds interesting. Unfortunately, I'm assuming like there's no like video of this play because it was 1990 and very few plays were ever recorded.
Tony actually put together a fantastic montage of the show.
Oh, excellent. Cool. Where can
Exist.
people find it?
Um, that's a great question.
Okay.
Probably on YouTube. If you probably do a Google search of La Commedia del Sangue, New York City, Tony Sokol, I'm sure you would find it. Because there was, I don't know if a bunch of it was on like cable access TV back Manhattan's like cable access back in the day. Like, I don't know why he's got so much video of it, but he does.
What where do the love, the obsession, the drive, and then the passion to get into the supernatural and tarot come from? I mean, is it before reading Anne Rice's novel?
Well, yeah, oh yeah, for sure, for sure. So my birthday's on Halloween. I was born,
Ah, you're kidding.
yeah,
Oh my
totally.
God, that's
So I
awesome.
always,
Where were you when I was in high school looking for a girlfriend that had a Halloween birthday?
well, I was here the whole time. Why couldn't you come and find me?
Because I was probably 10 years old in 1990.
Probably that's true. Okay.
Okay.
Even more exciting. No, yeah, no, so I always felt like a witch or a goblin or a very magical creature. And I also, as so many of us were in the 80s, I was also kind of really searching for my power and autonomy. And so I think that, and I also had kind of a crazy upbringing which brought me to a lot of wild places and interesting scenarios. So I feel as if I was probably very comfortable in the dark while trying to integrate the supernatural power of my characters into my actual self. And that's actually the same way that I work with tarot, not about predicting the future, not about using them to like tell your fortune, but how to hone the supernatural creature that you are. And so that's why all the tarot decks that I design also have a very dark gothic like tarot of the haunted house or the darkwood tarot, or the upcoming vampires tarot has a huge element of gothic darkness because I do believe that horror movies and fear put us in the same receptive space that organized religion and sacred ritual do, right? Because when you watch a horror movie, or you're like on edge, right? You're paying attention. It's an aphrodisiac. That's why people bring their boyfriends and girlfriends in to watch spooky things because you pay attention in a horror movie more like so hard, right? And that's why horror is still thriving right now and everybody has like limited attention spans. Horror movies keep our interest, right? So that there's so much horror stuff out there. So it's my belief that anything that puts you on edge like that gets you ready to either receive a teaching, to learn something new. And that's the same thing that ritualistic religious ceremony does. It seduces you into paying attention to whatever the message is or whatever it is that you're there to learn. So for me, they're kind of two sides of the same coin. Does that make sense?
Yeah. When I said I had a tarot deck before I went on to what the podcast was, I have two. I have a Vampirella tarot deck, so it's like
Yeah.
all images of Vampirella, the comic book character, and then I have one by designed by Jim Ballant and Tarot Holly Golightly from Tarot Witch of the Black Rose. Are you familiar with that comic book?
No, I haven't.
They use real life, like real world magic in the comic book. So a lot of times when they're talking, when the character Taro is talking, she's this like incredibly voluptuous red haired warrior, kind of like Red Sonja, but not set back in the time period. Wears like a metal gold bikini. Has a husband that's like this crypt keeper of a cemetery. This goth sister who practices more black magic. And they have, bi-monthly adventures in the pages of tarot versus anything from Krampus to a pumpkin man to the Fae to all sorts of things. And a lot of the stuff in that comes from like their actual, religious beliefs into the supernatural.
So cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yes, I just changed my background. I've had some problems with my blue screen on Zoom. A couple times when I've done reviews, I usually try to throw the movie poster that we're talking about behind me, and it's not worked. It's been this god awful pixelated mess. So I'm shocked this actually worked. So I'd rather have this if I don't have something great behind me. So it's my logo for my radio show. When you're designing these tarot cards, how where do you start? Where I mean, do you start with like the artwork? Do you I'm assuming since you've made so many, you've been doing this tarot thing for so long, you are an expert. We'll
Mhm.
get into that in a minute about how do you become an expert in this sort of thing. But how do you design a tarot deck to make sure it works correctly? Do you just need all the basic elements?
So actually for me, it's very, very simple. So all of the decks that I make are Rider-Waite-Smith clones, i.e. the Rider-Waite-Smith, the tarot deck that everybody's pretty much familiar with that came out in 1907 from the Golden Dawn. And that's kind of there's esoteric structure placed within that deck
Mm-hmm.
that if you're a magical student or an occult student, you recognize, but you kind of have to learn it to understand what you're looking at. I embed that structure loosely or specifically in the structure of all of my tarot cards. So you could just look at them and be like, "Oh, cool," and read it if you didn't know anything about it. But if you're a student of the occult, you really can deep dive into my decks. And I think that's why they've been so successful, because it's not just cute pictures that go along with the definition of the card. It's got a graphic symbolism and occult symbolism underneath it to make it a really nice cohesive whole.
How does one become an expert into tarot and the supernatural? I mean, is it something you get a degree for? Is it something that the audience gives you that title? I mean, how? Because when I mentioned you to that store, I said in New Hampshire, which I will find the name of it in 2 seconds because I have a receipt from them. Um, they knew immediately who you were and said, "Oh yeah, she's an expert in tarot."
Yeah. So I would say that the title of me being a tarot expert comes from the fact that I've published so many books and tarot decks.
Okay,
So I've published over 12 books. You can find me in bookstores all around the world. My foreign rights have been sold for both my tarot decks and my books. So you can, I think, in over 12 different languages.
okay.
And then my foreign publishers bring me overseas to teach tarot. So I do a lot of teaching. I do a lot of workshops. So I've taught in China, I've taught in the Middle East, I've taught all throughout Europe. So I mean, it's pretty sweet. I didn't expect this to happen when I started writing about tarot. I was just passionate about it. But it's literally brought me all over the world. Yeah, so I would say that that's why, like, for instance, China only the Chinese government only, I think, allows something like there's only 19 tarot books that are allowed to be published in China because they're very like down on the occult and any sort of organized religion. One of my books is one of the books that was published in China. So over there I'm considered a master. So yeah, it's mostly just from my publishing history, and then the classes that I teach, the conferences that I appear at. And yeah.
How many books have you published?
12 books and decks that I've created on my own. I think I'm doing my fourth deck, but then I've written guidebooks for a bunch of other tarot decks but that weren't my conception, that I just wrote the book.
Gotcha. So the name of the store in New Hampshire, by the way, is Deadwick's Ethereal Emporium. It's in Portsmouth.
Portsmouth.
Now,
That's a great town.
then the other town you obviously be familiar with is Salem, Massachusetts.
Yes.
Yes, that goes without saying. Which I'm assuming you've been to before.
Yeah, I was actually the keynote speaker at the Witch City Tarot Conference 2 summers ago. So I
Oh, okay, cool.
Salem's there.
I wouldn't have gone to that unless I knew somebody there or I had gotten an invite or somebody been on the show. But if you do go in, I will definitely make the time to make it aware in my schedule to come out to meet you in person in Salem. Especially
Yeah.
since you have this new vampire tarot deck coming out and you have a new book too.
Yeah, I have a vampire tarot deck that my illustrator is Abigail Larson. We did the Darkwood Tarot together.
Okay.
So the vampire tarot deck is she and I again. And that comes with a nice thick book. I have a book coming out, An Artist's Guide to Tarot, that's coming out with a UK company next year. Um, and yeah, and then I have a bunch of movies coming out. I have like 3 movies coming out
Yeah, I
this.
saw. That's how I found your name, and I recognized it based on like again, renting your films back in the 90s and 2000s. You had somebody had just posted that they had cast you in a film horror movie on Facebook in one of the groups I'm in.
Yeah, yeah.
What's that
Yeah,
movie?
that one is Victim No More,
That's it.
part 2. Yeah.
I'm a filmmaker myself. I'm kind of stepping back from the narrative filmmaking right now because I'm really concentrating on, and I have a great example to show you. This right here in my hand, I got this at a convention recently. I don't know if you can see that name. Probably not because I blue screened. Sorry. But there you go. You might be able to see it if I turn it a little bit in the blue screen. Okay,
Will
so it's
Eisner,
Will Eisner. You know who Will Eisner is, of course. It's the Eisner Awards. I'm working on a series of films about untold legends in comic books who have passed away, and we have an episode. It was a TV series, but honestly, I really feel like they should be like miniature films within a series of films. The first episode is going to be about Mark Grunwald, and if you don't know who he is, he wrote Captain America for 10 years, and he was the author of the official handbook to the Marvel Universe. Every entry of every character Marvel had ever created up to 1984, he wrote out.
Wow.
Yeah, that's like 90% of the Marvel universe. You know, before like Venom came along or something like that, it's like, who else did the Marvel create after 1980, like 1985, 86, 87? Like a couple characters here and there, Miss Marvel, the Century, whatever. But most of the body of work that's in the films. Anyway, Owen Wilson played a version of what he would look like in real life on the Loki. But I digress. The next episode we're working on is going to be about Bernie Wrightson, who is the master of horror macabre. He was the artist on like Frankenstein and Swamp Thing and many, many things, whatever. You look at his artwork online, you've seen it before. It's all dark and gross and mysterious. And this horror macabre artist, I do not think gets enough respect, considering the fact that I was just at a convention and 4 people couldn't even tell me who Bernie Wrightson was.
Wow.
That are artists that sell horror, that sell comic books. I was like, what? How do you not know who Bernie Wrightson is, but you proclaim to be an artist of dark art?
That's crazy.
And that's not to shame anyone, but it's to like educate yourself, mother.
Yeah,
you know, it's like I get Mark Grunwald is very unknown, unless you read Captain America. Denny O'Neil, same thing. You know, we're doing an episode about Denny O'Neil. Denny O'Neil was the editor on the Batman books for over a decade. He was also the creator of Ra's al Ghul, Talia, Lucius Fox, those people. But he was the editor on the Batman books for a long time, as well as a writer. I mean, he wrote the hard-edged hero story where Green Lantern and Green Arrow go on this like journey across America to discover it, things like that. But I digress. Other people were doing it on Darwin Cook, Gene Cullen, Paul Ryan, Kim Yates, who's John Ostrander's late wife. John Ostrander is the creator of the Suicide Squad. She was an editor in DC Comics. So those people as well. We don't have as much yet, but I have a ton of information about Denny and Bernie. Just get something going. So, but I digress. So that's as a filmmaker, the thing I'm kind of segueing into is these like documentaries about people I think deserve the credit as much as Stan Lee. Because you say Stan Lee, everyone knows who Stan Lee is. Everyone on the street knows who Stan Lee is because he's in 20 Marvel films that came out prior to Endgame. So, or up to Endgame, sorry. But I digress. We don't have a lot of much time left on the Zoom call. Again, please let us know if you're going to be in the Massachusetts area again. I would absolutely love to meet you, especially on your tour. You can come to the studio, promote it, talk about it on the air, or we can just definitely head out to Salem. I'm very interested in this Vampire Tarot deck, even though I'm not a tarot. I don't want to say I'm not a believer. It's just I'm a bit of a skeptic. You know what I mean? So
that's fair. That's fair.
But I find it fascinating to hear the stories about it. And that's why I do that podcast. So I'm always willing to give someone their due and to talk about it, even if I don't believe in ghosts and goblins and stuff like that.
But I think deep down you want to.
Maybe. I want to believe in vampires, but I mostly believe in sexy vampire women, hence why I write them. So
that's a good thing to believe.
And I go to balls. Like I went to Hammond Castle in Gloucester, Massachusetts. They had a vampire ball there. And I was there with my friend, and we were there for like 4 hours. Put on by Vamp Fangs, if you know that store in Salem. They're the host of it. And then the next day I flew out to go on my vacation at my friend's house in Hawaii. So
amazing! Oh my God, did you see a lot of sexy lady vampires?
Oh my God, it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. My friend might be hosting an event at her place coming up in Orange County, which is a mansion that might involve the vampire community. I don't know yet, so we'll see.
It's so funny.
She dressed to the nines in a whole vampire-looking kind of sexy gothic You know what I mean? I needed a plus one. I bought the tickets a year ago when I had a girlfriend. Unfortunately, that ended. So I contacted a couple female friends of mine to be like, I need a date to this thing. I'm not bringing a dude with me. So I contacted a couple friends that I knew either were single or were comfortable, were, you know, their whatever, their significant other was okay going to a date. So she came with me. Her name is Isabella Sinclair. She was the person who came with me. You can look her up online. I won't get into a lot of the details of who she is, but you'll look her up online. Go, oh, well, this, yes. But we had a blast for 4 hours again before I flew out to Hawaii.
Did you ever get to an Anne Rice ball down in New Orleans? Was she
No,
alive?
unfortunately. I wanted to meet Anne Rice so very much. And this show has been going on since 2007. I had tried multiple times to have Anne Rice on my show before she passed away, but it did not happen. So
She's amazing.
she
She's so
was. I
I
heard, yeah.
actually was able to give her a copy of my first book
That's
when it
awesome.
came out. And she looked at me and she said, "Well, are you going to sign it?" And I like melted. I died. I was like, "I can't. You're too awesome."
Real quick story. My first comic book I ever published, connected to this. The Vlada, now you can't see it now that it's green screen, but the thing I showed you, Vlada Dracula Tale, the prequel comic book we published in 2016. I was at a Comic Con in 2018, and Tom King was there. I don't know if you know who Tom King is, the writer. He was the writer on Batman for about 85 issues, and off again, on again on other books, and he's still a writer at DC Comics. And I showed him my book. I wanted to just hand it to him, and he said to me, Batman number 50 had just come out, and it was the wedding issue of Catwoman and Batman that ended up not happening. And he said, "Did you buy my book?" I was like, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I want to buy your comic book." And he starts to proceed to take out money and hand it. I was like, "No, you can have this." He goes, "No, you bought my comic book. You bought Batman number 50, despite knowing what had happened in it. I want to buy your comic book." And my girlfriend at the time is taking picture after 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 picture. She must have taken like 100 pictures of me or Tom. You could flip book it of Tom reaching to his wallet and handing me money or whatever. I was flabbergasted by it. I would love to see Tom King again on the con. Be like, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me. You know that has now become these other comics and books and whatever. But you know that was a huge deal to me. You are the writer of Batman. You know,
Exactly.
that's like the
It's
director of Batman. That's like somebody playing Batman buying my book or whatever. That's as important as that because he's the writer who creates those stories for Hollywood to make into cartoons and movies. So
yeah. But
maybe I was crying my eyes out when I left this table because I was so like, oh my god, Tom King bought my
same,
comic book. So,
same,
but
same.
why don't you plug your website where people can find more information about you?
Oh yeah. So people can find it's really easy, sashagraham.com.
It is very easy. I found you like that. And all your
I'm
listings come up on
Google.
Google, your Instagram and your IMDb, and you can check out her IMDb bevy of films that she's done through the 90s. And then you should put that link up to that play you were talking about on your website too.
That's actually a really good idea. I hadn't thought to do that, but I
Yeah, because
will.
I'll try and find it, but email me a link to that play if you have the link to the YouTube. We'll put
Will
it in
do.
the comment section below this video after we broadcast this. So
Will do. Will do.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. This was awesome.